start sharing my screen, and I'll double check in a moment that you are seeing the same slides that I am sharing. So is that just coming up? Gemma, can you just confirm?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, so welcome to our Primary Computing Leads Network, the last one of the year. As I say, we are recording it, but if you've got any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat, or we're such a small group tonight, just unmute and chip in, because we want to make it as kind of interactive as possible. Okay, I'm going to just share the agenda with us, and I am expecting Paul Hunt from Newstead Wood, the computing science lead for United Learning, to join us, but he's sometimes a little bit delayed because of the later finish there at Newstead Wood. I have got some slides to fill in if he's not able to join us, but I won't share those until we're clear one way or the other. So we're going to hear a little bit from Paul about assessment in the Teach Computing scheme. I'm going to sort of throw open to you the idea of class and pupil portfolios. How are you evidencing computing? I want to share a couple of options and just see what people are doing or what people would like to do. I think it's an area that isn't that well developed yet, but it's something perhaps for the future. I also want to just share with you something I did recently with Emma at High Hazel's computing CPD resources that are already prepared. So I'm just going to share those in case they're of use to anybody else. There's been a fairly recent Ofsted computing review, and I'll just share some of the headlines in that. I don't think there's any surprises, but it's useful for you to know where that document is. And if you do want to have a thorough read through, I'd recommend that. We'll check just for a few online safety updates, and then a Q&A session, or anything you'd like to include for the next session, which is obviously next year now, and we can discuss briefly if there's anything there that we want to focus on. So that's what we're covering tonight. I'm going to jump past Paul's bit because I can't see Paul yet on the call, and I know he'll have his own elements to share. So we'll come back to this, and I've got some slides if we need them, but I'll just leave that bit for the moment. So I'm going to start off just talking about this a little bit, and hopefully we'll have a bit of a discussion about it. It's evidencing the computing curriculum. What are we doing? What do you do at your school? And if we haven't started evidencing yet, what are the different options we could look at to support the process? So I'm just going to show you a few kind of different ways you could do it. These are just examples as opposed to what a real school's doing. I'm just kind of trying to illustrate the options available to you. So a very simple way is to use one of your shared drives. You might have it in your OneDrive if you're the computer lead. You might have it in a SharePoint site or a Team site, which is in essence the same thing as a SharePoint site. It's just the folder structure behind Teams. So you might end up with a folder structure where you've got all the different year groups, and in each year group you've got the 6 terms, and then you can start putting in some evidence of the kind of work that you've covered in that year. So this is more of a class portfolio. It would be useful if you're the computing lead to be able to just quickly look in the folders of the other year groups and get a sense of what they're doing as a class. I know at the moment it may be quite tricky. I've asked 1 or 2 computing leads, how do you know what's going on? And they say it is actually a challenge to know what's going on with the other years. So this is one particular structure you could use to kind of bring everyone together and start putting some evidence together in a central place where you can look at it, and then teachers can also look back on what was done in previous years, and to get that sense of kind of continuity and progression over the curriculum. So a simple kind of folder structure could work. We could also use something like Sway, where we could put in a class portfolio. Here's an idea of a kind of a year 4 Sway. I've got a link here, and it will just kind of show the various elements that you can put together. So I'm just sharing a Sway one here. Again, this is just my example, the sort of thing you could put together, maybe to show an Ofsted inspector, maybe to show the head teacher, whatever you think. So here's just an example of a whole school portfolio where we're just putting in some screenshots and some annotations about the kind of work that's been going on in computing over the the course of the year. So that kind of Sway portfolio could be quite a nice way of presenting that kind of information. And then the final idea is using something called Class Notebook. And some of you are getting more familiar with the Microsoft tools like Sway. Well, Class Notebook is, if you like, a digital folder for your whole class where you could put together a whole class portfolio, if you like, in the content area. You can make that available for parents as well, if you wanted to, or other outside parties, like an Ofsted inspector. You can just collate everything in a notebook page, or even better, if you start developing individual portfolios, then each child can have a little kind of area in their own notebook space to build up their work portfolios in computing, of course, but other subjects as well. So it's a way of kind of digitalizing that kind of class record book. So we've got an example of it. And again, I'll just link to an example site here. Just save it, just load it a bit quicker. So this is Asif's own individual portfolio. He can add in work as he progresses through the year, giving some examples of the sorts of, work he's covered in it. And in the same way, if you wanted, rather than an individual one, a class one, then you have a content library in Class Notebook where you could put just, examples rather than every individual pupil having one. So there's just a few ideas in terms of what's available to you to start, if you like, collecting evidence for computing. I just wondered now if it might be helpful just to perhaps ask one or two of you on the call just to share, what, if anything, you are doing in terms of, collecting portfolios of computing work. Emma, I'm going to start with you first, bit of cold calling. I know it's kind of early days. Have you thought about any kind of portfolios yet?
So it's varied depending on the age of the child. So the infants, they have a big portfolio book, a little bit like a big book, and they actually do print out examples and make a one page based on all the different work from the children in their class, so you can see the variant abilities and probably a few quotes from the children. So that's in the infants. In the junior, probably year 3 are still doing that as well, because we're not quite ready for what the juniors are doing. They have their own individual folders in teams, and they save their work in there. And that is, depending on the teacher, a little bit hit and miss as to how well they're saved.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Emma. Anybody else? I mean, Holly, what do you do at Abbey Hay in terms of evidencing it, or is that again early days for you?
We have floor books for everybody. We've rolled them out since we started the United Learning Curriculum, and they've been really successful. So we have the long-term plan, and then each lesson is documented. Further up, they have their own account, so where they can save things to their OneDrives. That's working really well, and it evidences really well what they're doing.
Yeah, and that must be useful for, for you to get that overview, and also for teachers who are kind of trying to look back and see what children did the previous year.
Yeah, and it's really good for the children because they can talk about if they've got the book in front of them, they can look back and they can talk about what they've been doing because they remember it from the pictures or whatever's in their book.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Scott, I know you've got your hand up. Could you want to share what you're doing?
Yeah, actually, I was just very interested in hearing what Holly had to say about flow books, because I think that's probably the road that we're going to go down. And I think there's something about that kind of whole class collective experience that makes the learning more memorable to the individual child. sometimes you can look through a book and they just, you know, we've done some pupil conferencing and it's strong in areas, but overall patchy. But in terms of recollection of the learning, I think a flow book for us would be really helpful. I think we're probably going to go down that road. So hearing that from Holly is really quite encouraging.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else on the call would like to share anything? Hi, Cheryl. I haven't said hello, but good evening and welcome. And we've got Lisa, Rebecca and Noah. Is there anything you want to chip in? Please do so. But
been all the way through.
Yeah, Dan, it's just something that we're looking to develop. So it's been useful sharing some of those ideas, actually. I think we're looking at moving towards the floor books. There's a bit of a record of what they've been doing. And just like you say, to guide that chat when anybody comes in to ask what they've been doing, just helps jog the memory.
yeah, and that floor book, I take it, is a kind of a united learning approach as well. It's something that's perhaps used in other subjects, and you know, you get that continuity between subjects. Then, was there anything else you wanted to add, Scott?
Yeah, actually, just Holly mentioned about the children independently uploading their evidence to OneDrive, and I'm just wondering how they're finding that experience. How, you know, roughly how long is it taking for you, Holly, to get the children to be able to independently do that? Because I think we'd like to be able to do something like that with Class Notebook or OneDrive as well. So the other idea I was thinking was whether we had a QR code as well on the floor book, so that anyone can, you know, anyone visiting can actually scan it and get to the evidence fairly quickly from just looking at the floor book.
Yeah, that's certainly a good idea. Holly, how complicated is it for children to get to learn to navigate their OneDrive, etc.?
It took a while at first. We've started saying we're going to start training them from year one so that they're just used to it all the time. It has taken quite a while, but now they're getting the hang of it further up the school. It is getting easier.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And just share what Rebecca's put in the chat, how she asks each teacher to take a screenshot of the top, middle and bottom chart for each unit of work and save it on Teams. So again, you're building up that kind of portfolio of evidence so you can see roughly where, you know, different levels of children are. And you know, I think it's really useful if you can build that over time, because when new teachers come in, they can quickly look back at last year's, I don't know, year 4, and this is the kind of the level of work that was produced last year. I think it gives you a good kind of, you know, standard to aim for, if you like, or and something that will, you know, build up over time. So thanks for sharing those. I think it is very much a work in progress, but I'm kind of encouraged really by some of the good practice that's going on, because as I say, a few times I've asked people, they've kind of looked at me rather blankly as if say, what evidence? But yeah, it's something we've obviously got to work towards, and I'm pleased to see that we're making some progress there. Okay, I can't see Paul on the call, so I think we'll press on, and I will go back to that bit at the end and just finish off with that. So one of the things that I was made aware of in published in May was some research review that Ofsted did on computing. Now, this is this computing subject right from year 1 to, you know, A level, I presume. It's not just a primary one. So some of the things may be more appropriate for secondary than primary, but I think it's quite useful just to share a few headlines without going into detail. You've got the link there, and these slides will be available afterwards. These were the kind of the main findings when it came to what does high quality computing look like. And not surprisingly, it's you know, the breadth of that curriculum to include the computer science, which is, you know, the theory as well as the programming, the information technology side, which is the, you know, using and creating artifacts, that kind of thing, and the digital literacy, you know, all the online safety and knowing how to use the internet appropriately and searching skills. So there's those kind of 3 broad areas that they mention, and they kind of make the difference, you know, the differential between declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge, knowing that and knowing how. And I think that's very similar to the approach that we've done in our kind of curriculum as well. And then you know, the use of technology is underpinned by that knowledge, so nothing too surprising there. And then again, plenty more kind of bullet points as we go through. I won't try and read them all out to you. just pull out a few points really that particularly important. This is, important programming knowledge to become skillful programmers, and problem solving underpinned by subject knowledge, kind of things you'd expect. And then when it comes on to the kind of IT, the information technology bits, it's creating digital artifacts underpinned by the knowledge of what they're doing, developing the schemata, and that's one of the strengths of the Teach Computing curriculum, in a way, that the way it has kind of builds up. I'm not saying that Purple Mash and Rising Stars don't. Well, I'm just not quite so familiar with those particular schemes, but I do know they're in use across United Learning. And it's about making sure you don't make assumptions about prior knowledge. I think with the portfolios and that, it's easier to look back and work out what they should have done, and then quickly assess that at the beginning of a unit. And it goes on to say about knowledge and skills clearly identified, and curriculum sequencing related to e-safety. And I think that's where what we've done at United Learning, and bring in the extra materials from Project Evolve, will help with that, because we're kind of using their sequence of progression. So it's not just anything pulled in at any year. There's appropriate kind of activities for each year group based on the Project Evolve content. And it goes on to say about facts and essential concepts, a sequence. Again, a lot of kind of notes about curriculum sequencing. Well, hopefully our schemes of work have done a good job there. And then this final one about how you teach it. Is it a discrete subject or cross curricular? And there isn't a right or wrong way. It's just the best way for your particular use. And sometimes it may be discrete, and other times it may be cross curricular. It's just knowing what you are teaching when you are being cross curricular, being very focused about these are the IT skills or the programming skills that we want to use, even if we're doing it in the context of history or literacy or whatever. And then it comes back to some of our Rosenshine principles as well. So, I mean, that's kind of reassuring that teachers use worked examples appropriately to solve problems. And probably more a secondary point about textbooks, but yeah, so some good points there, and things that I think our approaches to pedagogy will be useful for. And finally, assessment, focus on the knowledge and skills identified in the curriculum, not generic ones. So that's kind of important. And then using formative assessment, which is again part and parcel of Rosenshine. So yeah, a few final points there about CPD. I think that's something that will be something as a computing lead you'll be thinking about, making sure that your teachers have the the relevant subject knowledge, and using channels like this to develop and share expertise. Again, a challenge. I know something that Emma, we've talked about. It's a challenge sometimes to find adequate curriculum time for computing. There's a lot to fit in, isn't there? So that kind of hour a week is kind of something that we've got to aim to do. Did you want to come in on that, Emma? I just saw your hand go up briefly, so please do.
Just to agree, really. There's so much to fit into the primary curriculum that sometimes you feel that you are sort of screaming, don't forget computing along the way. But you understand that there's other things too. Yeah,
that's right. I haven't got an easy solution for you. I mean, what my starting point, would be, well, it's an hour a week for 36 weeks a year, but that's easy for me to say. I'm not designing all your curriculum, but to be honest, you kind of need that amount of time to cover the content. But say, you know, there are other ways of doing it. You don't have to do it all discreetly. You can do some of it as cross-curricular, but it's making sure you're clear on what you are doing, and so we get that sort of progression between units.
Dan, I had a conversation with a couple of my schools. They were like, "Oh, can we just have a computing day?" And that's where actually, when we think about Rosenshine, it hasn't got the same, like having an art day or a DT day, yes, because you're working on big projects. But actually, with computing, when you're going back into that revisiting and recapping, it's really hard to then have that computing day. And if we're thinking on a bigger picture about those digital literacy skills, it really does benefit the children more to be doing it each week or each fortnight. Now, I know when I went to a curriculum leads meeting just before I came into this role with Tanya, she had created a timetable for both Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, which did fit everything in. It was obviously quite tight on elements, but it did show a really good use of how you can ensure that like all of these subjects are taught weekly. So I don't know if that's still floating about, but it was quite a nice example. Yeah. But it is, I've come from the classroom and seen that obviously I know we're being asked to do lots at the moment.
I know when I spoke to Charlie Cutler about it, she was very much of the view that, you know, a computing day is not the answer. It does have to be taught progressively on a regular basis. And in some ways, I was having a chat, she's not on the call today, but Nikki McCarthy at Marlborough Road, she's got a slight challenge in that they're going to be mixed year groups next year. And it's saying, well, how do I teach computing to a mixed year group? And it is going to be challenging, but it's a bit like maths, really. You know, the concepts build up on each other, and you can't suddenly start doing, you know, this unit of programming if you haven't done the 2 units before, and there'll be too many gaps. So it is a tricky one, but you've got to, in some ways, particularly the programming ones, it's very important you do them in sequence, and that you know, you build on the, you know, the prior knowledge. So it's going to be challenging. Okay, well, that report's there. The slides will be, you know, available afterwards, and you can read through at your leisure the Ofsted report. But there's no real surprises there. It's all about sequencing, making clear on what you're teaching, and you know, using the appropriate you know, pedagogical skills to make sure it's taught effectively. I'm just sharing also on this slide here some work I did at High Hazels a few weeks ago. I won't go through it all, of course, but there is a PowerPoint slide if you want to do some CPD next year about not just about pattern recognition. It was about progression in computing, and this particular slide looked at some of the unplugged activities you can do. So, you know, doing computer science without a computer, there's quite a lot of, you know, activities that you can develop to develop, you know, all those core skills of pattern recognition, logic, decomposition, building algorithms, etc. So I'm just highlighting that as a resource for you, and you'll better download the slides I used there. And if you've got any, you know, questions about it, then obviously you can follow up afterwards. I'm just going to share a few online safety things I've come across, just in case it's useful, really, and again as a reference for going forward. One of the things I found, and it's been quite a discussion point with 1 or 2 schools about the kind of screen time, and really, and what is the appropriate amount of screen time for children, and obviously that will be age appropriate. I mean, when you're older, you'll probably spend longer in front of the screen, just the nature of the work that you have to do. But the Children's Commissioners come up with a digital 5 a day, and it, you know, it's quite a nice tie in with the you know, the healthy eating thing. So I've just shared that and a link there to the research that went around it. So whenever you get kind of parents asking about, you know, what is the right amount of screen time, there's not necessarily one right answer, but pointing them in this kind of direction might be useful. What else have I come across? this is the same sort of thing, follows on from that, about screen-based activities for young people's mental health. And again, just a bit more information about the amount of screen time if it's a concern for parents. This came up particularly with a school who had a one-to-one iPad scheme, and the children were, going home and saying, oh, I've got to be online for 4 hours. Of course they hadn't. There was really just a very limited, 20-minute, half an hour slot to do something on with a digital device. And obviously the children were being on there for several hours, obviously talking on whatever systems they were using, and it wasn't something sanctioned by the school. So it's just sometimes useful to be able to share this kind of thing with parents. And as Gemma says in the chat there, it's handy to put up these guides on your websites, for supporting parents in when they're trying to work with their children about the right kind of screen time, etc. These kind of guides are often very useful. I came across this from Thorn Publishing, online safety support for parents. It's conversation starters. So one of the key things about online safety for parents is talk to your children regularly. And some parents might say, yeah, but what about? How do I get started? So there are 18 topic-based discussion guides following this link here. So again, thought it was useful just to pinpoint, there are some resources there to help parents have these conversations with their children. Another site that I think is quite useful to use from time to time is LGFL DigiSafe. That's London Grid for Learning. You don't have to subscribe to LGFL to be able to access DigiSafe. Some top tips in there for parents, and there's also stuff for teachers as well. So a useful site when you're hunting around for resources to support parents or to support your online safety curriculum. And one I tend to use every week is from a site called Unique. They do a safeguarding sound bites every week, and it's just a 1-minute recap of things that are happening, and it doesn't take long to listen to, and sometimes you get a useful bit of information, and it's also got some useful kind of links in there. So just sharing that one in case you haven't come across it. I think that was it on my online safety. So I'm going to go back and share a little bit about assessment in a moment, but I'll just at this stage hand over to you just to, if there's anything you'd like to share or any challenges you want to ask us or the colleagues on the call, or if there's anything that you'd like to look at the next meeting. So I'll just hand it over to you for a moment while I just go back and get those assessment slides ready. So feel free to unmute.
Hi, something I just wanted to ask is, I'm sure people, what we were talking about earlier with managing time, is we were looking at doing on a half-termly basis and like alternating it with music and art. So like every other half time. I didn't know if that's something other people have previously done and what people thought about, and if they managed to still have the coverage of the curriculum, and just people's experience really.
Do you want to get started on that, Emma? Did you try and mix it with music at all?
So what we did is sort of slipped it in to one of the half terms rather than, we did try and we've done a few things this year. We've sort of slipped it in and I've just had to keep a track on it. That's been tricky. We did have it on an alternate with, I think it might have been RE, I can't remember which subject, it wasn't music, can't remember which. Either way, the ideal is for an hour a week, but I understand where it's not fitting in. So I if anyone's got the answer that they could, if they could persuade my senior leaders, well, I'm one of them, but if they could help, that I'd appreciate that.
Holly, what's your approach at Abbey Hay? Do you manage to fit in an hour a week?
We have about 45 minutes, but we have one designated teacher in the school that teaches computing for everyone, and it's a PPA cover, so it works quite well for us because it's the same person and it is getting taught all the time. But it is tight with timing. Yeah.
Scott, Noah, any particular approaches you use at Langford or Southway?
No magic wand at the moment, Dan, but other than just as computing lead taking responsibility and just checking MTPs and then going into 365 and checking that the resources are there, and obviously doing the pupil conferencing and knowing that things are being done. But no magic wand as yet. I think there's just pressure across the board, isn't there? So it's trying to make it happen. For what it's worth, since we've adopted Teach Computing, every year group has managed to complete a unit since last term and this term. So if we can continue in that vein, that would be excellent.
Yeah, I think Scott as well, with you kind of being on it with the guys, making sure that they've got like the Chromebook trolley booked out as well. That was kind of like I really liked your approach to that as well. And in fact, we've got these resources, book them out. You can teach a computing lesson. And then that's how, from a digital strategy perspective, we're integrating it into other areas. And I think it was kind of that little nugget to people saying, you need to book it out. Then being able to see that everyone had booked it, they start using it a wee bit more.
Yeah, we've been really lucky actually, because speaking with Mike and also with Simon Oliver, I've managed to arrange for Chromebooks to go home with teachers over the summer, just hopefully on a full charge. They will sign them out. There'll be a counter signatory as well. There'll be a serial number logged, so they can take them home and just experiment using them. I know from my transition day last week, I've got 3 or 4 of my pupils with serious EAL challenges, and I know that Chromebook is going to, immersive reader is going to be, a hugely helpful tool to me, I think, in the classroom. So I think if I can just give the teachers a chance to use it, they can watch Love Island or whatever it is, with it on the lap. It'll be finished by then, won't it? But whatever they're watching, they can just, try and build some confidence in using it, I think so.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. And I think that time to play around with things is very important, whether it's a Chromebook or an iPad, whatever devices are being used. As a teacher, you want to feel confident in what it does and how to access the various resources. So I'm just going to spend just a few minutes. Obviously, Paul's had a few problems joining us tonight, so I'll just cover his little section, which he was going to talk about assessment in the Teach Computing scheme. Now, I've had a good look through, and there isn't an assessment activity for every single unit. It's there in Key Stage 2 for probably about 60 to 70% of the units. In Key Stage 1, there aren't any assessment units yet. Whether hopefully they'll be developed over time, because I think it is useful if you can set some sort of a assessment task at the end of a unit, just to get a sense of how well some of the concepts have been understood. So we'll have a quick look at some of them to see how they develop. If there isn't an assessment task as such, there may be one of these assessment rubrics, which is just kind of a grading system, if you like, for some of the key concepts which you could use instead of so it'd be a teacher assessment kind of scoring card as opposed to a series of questions. But we'll have a look at some of the questions just to see and give a flavour of what they are. And you could obviously use these as standalone if your particular scheme, if it was Purple Mash or Rising Stars, if it doesn't have any assessment, or you'd just like to see how they do in these other ones, then you can just dip in and out of them. So here in Year 3, for example, this is one of the units called Connecting Computers, more about the general kind of networking of computers and how devices work. Just some simple little activities there about what is a digital device, what is an input. They do come with answers. I'm not suggesting you'd need the answers for these, but they do come with answers if you wanted to, to be a bit quicker, but it's quite fun working them out as well. So that's an example of Year 3 activity. example of a year 4 activity. These sometimes might give you ideas for unplugged things as well. So obviously these assessments are unplugged. You do them away from a computer, and it might, you might end up thinking, oh, these will be quite good 10-minute tasks for something unplugged to get them thinking about repetition. So here you've got to identify the kind of the unit that repeats, or use a command like repeat 3 times, draw this and that. So it's following those kind of commands, and then a bit of kind of logo type sort of algorithms here, which one would be the longest line. That wouldn't be too difficult for you to work out, but you can see how you might develop tasks like that. And also introducing this kind of language. When we did that CPD at High Hazels, I put down the vocabulary progression, which I shared last time, and it was noticeable that people were kind of surprised almost about the type of language that's used right from year 1 onwards. And these things like count controlled loops come in at year 4. So being able to just check that we understand the language that we're doing here, and you can see here B would be a count controlled loop because it repeats it 2 times. So there's those kind of assessments in there. And in year 5, there's obviously 6 units, but the database unit, for example, has a series of assessment questions. Do they understand terminology like fields and records and so on? So they're quite useful resources there. And again, this is quite useful just to take little screenshots of code snippets to see if children understand what's happening in them. Can they debug them? Can they work out which one's doing which? And so on. This one is to do with variables. For example, which one would count down from 60 seconds to 0? You can have a little look at that, test yourself. And this question here is, when does the score change? What kind of action makes this variable called score change? So you can see how you could perhaps use some of the resources for assessment in the Teach Computing scheme, just to help with your kind of workload. If there's already question sets there, it makes sense to use them. We'll perhaps just finish with a quick discussion about how do we use assessment in computing at the moment? Has anybody got any particular resources or approach that they use in their schools? Scott, have you looked at assessment yet in computing?
I'm going to be honest and say we've not got that far yet. No, we have not.
No, it doesn't surprise me. We're still, many of us, finding our way in this. I don't know if anyone on the call is using any sorts of assessment at all. Might take that as a no, but Emma might prove me wrong. Rebecca's
No.
I've made I can statements. Yeah, so the children self-assess, I presume, on that one, Rebecca, for each year group topic. So yeah, that may be a start, using some sort of self-assessment, I can statements.
We had our unit front covers, so a bit like what we did for like geography, history, art, again, and taking those kind of I can statements were at the start of our portfolios, and then it was a case we did it like a pre-unit and a post-unit assessment, and a bit like Rebecca's just put, both the child and the teacher completed those, so it was all of the objectives for the unit and just kind of rating how confident they were by the end of it. Also doing a bit like your weekly and monthly reviews and your recaps at the start of a lesson. We were then taking, because computing was taught weekly, we would do a weekly start the computing lesson. It would be a recap from 1 or 2 weeks before, so that then we're just keeping that going, and particularly any misconceptions we needed to address. So although it wasn't the real, like, a proper full-on assessment at the end of a unit, we were able to be assessing as we were going and building up that evidence. So at the start, within their portfolio, we always printed the recap out, so it was a bit like a worksheet, or if it was a monthly quad, and having those 4 in there.
Yeah, I think you know, all those are useful kind of formative assessment pieces, aren't they? And then you've got this kind of summative assessment activity here. If it's, you know, obviously if you've taught that unit, it will be perhaps a useful thing to start building in. And again, that could go in children's portfolios, or just as you know, a top, middle, and a working towards sort of you know, for your class kind of book, if you like, the floor book, etc. It's just really pointing out these resources are available, and it, you know, might be something to build in for the future, the assessment aspect of computing. Okay, that's me finished with the slides there. So let me just get me back up my slide and stop sharing. Okay, I just want to kind of finish off now with just any final questions anyone's got, or if there's anything they want to kind of carry forward to next year. What would you like us to you know, focus on in the first network meeting next year? Obviously, it's probably, you're probably thinking more about finishing now and going on summer break, but if you have got anything you'd like us to cover the next meeting, please say, or put in the chat. I haven't got any dates yet. I don't know what's happening next year in terms of dates for Subject Network. I don't think they've been published, but I'm certainly haven't seen any, but obviously they fit round other CPD that's going on, and I'm not sure if that's been decided next year. I'm sure they will carry on in some format or other. So do let us know if there's anything in particular you'd like for that first meeting, which will be in the autumn term. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining tonight. Is there anything anybody would like to ask or say before we finish? No? Well, thank you everyone for attending. Have a really great summer break. Scott, come on then.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if I was going to speak to Gemma again. I wish you all the best. Thank you for all your support. You've been a rock, and you'll be sorely missed by us. I'm quite sure of that. Thank you, Gemma.
Brilliant. Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, for those of you that don't know, I know I've spoken to most of you. Yeah, this will be my last computing meeting with you all.
Yeah, we all wish Gemma the best of luck in a fantastic new role created especially for her by Portsmouth City Council. So we look forward to hearing of Gemma's success there, and I think she will be still working occasionally with some of our schools. Is that right, Gemma? Is that
Yeah, still working with Portsmouth. So
yeah. So yeah, all best wishes from all the computing leads. Hope that works out. I'm sure it will. Fantastic opportunity for you, and thanks everyone for joining us and your support over the year. We'll reconvene in the autumn term, and in the meantime, have a really good break, and do drop us a line. Some of us will be here over summer. I'm not complaining because we have our breaks at different times, but if there is anything you want to ask over the summer, that we will be manning the office. So thanks everyone. I'm going to stop recording now.
thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone.